Well, I came to get it on. Let's get it on.
Might be accessible or interesting to you, but also you have the opportunity to help shape the legislation as well. Our lawmakers need to hear from you to know what should go into legislation. So unless they hear from you, what's going to happen? There's a strong chance that communities of color and low-income communities are going to get boxed out. They're going to get left behind, and they're not going to have the opportunities to get into this industry and be able to provide for themselves and their families. And so we have with us tonight an esteemed panel of amazing people who are doing great work in their local regions. We have Eric Knudsen, I'm sorry. We have Eric Knudsen, co-founder of Keith Brands, and he is also the CEO and chairman of Cancore Concepts. Cancore's primary mission is to provide legal cannabis markets with manufacturing consulting, IP licensing, and packaging solutions. Eric has more than 8 years of experience operating in a wide variety of enterprises within legal cannabis industry, and Keith Brands has operations in California, Colorado, Arizona, Puerto Rico, and looking towards the future, Michigan, Nevada, and Jamaica as well. We also have Kristen Jordan. Well, actually, let me go down the line here. We have Y. Livingston, also from Colorado. Y founded Y Stone's World Teas in Denver back in January of 2006. She sells a line of wine beauty products and teas made from finest organically grown Colorado hemp. And her entrepreneurial spirit and leadership skills have made her a leader in the business community. And the commitment that she has made to Y Stone's teas has led her to be awarded the best new franchise concept from the Rocky Mountain International Franchise Association back in 2009. Next, we have Kristen Jordan. Kristen is the chair of Newman Ferrera's emerging cannabis and hemp practice group based in New York City. Kristen has over 20 years of experience in real estate, state licensing, and governmental regulatory experience. She currently advises lab testing facilities, producers, manufacturers, retailers, ancillary businesses, and nonprofit organizations in the cannabis and hemp industries. Kristen is also an active member in the National Cannabis Bar Association, the New York City Cannabis Bar Association, and the Minority Cannabis Business Association as well. And last but certainly not least, we have Isaac Cullen. Isaac is a former Wall Street executive, and he's now a partner at an investment firm, Uncommon Partners LLC, which is dedicated to really focusing on real estate investments in underdeveloped urban areas and private equity investments in startups and small businesses that are owned and operated by people from communities of color and women. And his firm has investments in the cannabis industry, which includes delivery businesses in Oregon. And so Isaac has a strong background and understanding of the financial investing needs of people who are looking to get in this market. So we're really excited to have all of our panelists here coming from many long journeys. We'll start with Eric and then go down the line. Can each of you briefly describe how you became interested in the cannabis industry and cannabis legalization as a racial justice matter?
Absolutely. So, started into it, my younger brothers and I were all in family business, construction, framed my way through college. 2007, ended up graduating college and figured I was going to move into a life of contracting and building homes. And that really wasn't on the radar following '08 and the crash. Being from Boulder specifically, I kind of grew up with cannabis as a part of my everyday life, not really understanding what that meant outside of where I lived. It's particular, obviously the numbers that Diane threw out earlier and many others. It's the injustice that's followed this plant from the start is something that I've really learned to appreciate and has been a driving factor, I believe, in everything that we've done and most of the business opportunities that we go after in trying to create an inclusive environment for everybody. I think this plant has that ability to do so more so than almost anything else, and just based in the root of its illegal time as an illegal plant. So we ended up starting the businesses in 2010. Somehow managed to wind up in manufacturing. I think one of the things I share is never shut off any path. We thought we were going into the retail side of it, and really quickly figured out where we were going to wind up. The manufacturing side was a pretty natural fit for us. We started making beverages in January of 2010, and by the end of that year, through a bunch of trial and tribulations, we found a decent home and wound up planting our flag as one of the leading brands in the state of Colorado. So I think through all of that, though, like I said, learning the social injustice side of this, of what's occurred over the years, has really been something that's brought this into more of from a business to a passion for me personally, and led eventually to here, being able to spread knowledge and hope that this is a business that can change lives, and really to create positive futures for generations.
Hi, everybody. Glad to see all these bright and shining faces out here on a Wednesday night for a great topic. And my journey is, I call myself a recovering corporate executive. So after I left the corporate life, I decided that I was going to do something much easier, which would be open a tea restaurant. And that was in 2008. And I've always been a person that's very interested in herbology. That's why I started a tea company. And I saw the benefits of that plant. And living in Colorado while that was going on, certainly I wasn't blind to the fact that the cannabis business was growing by leaps and bounds. And so I decided to do what I normally do, take what I am really good at, what is my core competence, and how do I take those skills and move them over to the cannabis world. My tea company blends teas for Miller Coors for their beer. We blend tea for Whole Foods markets. We blend teas for spas and other high-end places. And so I had a lot of experience doing food in food development, food and beverage development. And so I decided I was going to combine that with cannabis and really make the plant, both of these plants, come together in a way that really hadn't been done before. And I decided to do my product through licensing agreements. I'm not interested in growing. I'm not a grower. I wasn't interested in the retail side of the business. I'm interested in product development, and I'm specifically interested in edible and drinkables. That is one of the fastest growing segments of this overall marketplace. And so at one point, I believe we will see stores like mini Whole Foods that are nothing but filled with cannabis-infused and hemp-infused products. I think that's a reality that's not that far away, and I certainly want to be a part of that. Having decided to do our product through a licensing agreement, you have to go out and find a good manufacturer, which I did. And I'm very fortunate that we partnered with Eric's company because as a small company like myself, it's really important to move with a company that's larger than yours and that can get you into markets in a more faster pace. From a social injustice perspective, my whole objective is to really share that there are other ways to be in this business besides the ones that are so obvious. And I challenge people that no matter what your passion is or what line of business you're in currently, I can probably find a way to tell you how you can get into cannabis doing that same thing or a variation of it.
Hello? So I'm Kristen Jordan, and I'm an attorney practicing in New York for the last 20 plus years. I have been involved in real estate in one way or another, either as a practicing attorney or running corporate real estate departments. I got into this space because along that path, I also represented the hospitality industry doing liquor license applications. And so when I was hearing noise around, the idea of recreational coming to the East Coast, I knew that, at least in New York, we would see recreational come underneath the liquor authority. And so position us as and create an opportunity for my law firm to really create a new group within the practice. And so, I looked around in 2014 and let the partners know that this is what I wanted to do and to build within the law firm. And I think 3 out of the 4 of them started laughing. And the other one started Googling Colorado. And as soon as they started seeing numbers, they realized that there's something here. That was 3 years ago, and unfortunately we still don't have a legal scheme in New York. However, I do believe it's within reach and probably piggybacking on New Jersey a couple of years behind. So we are excited about that. In the interim, I have to feed my family and figure out how to maintain a presence within the industry. And so it brings me to the social justice question. A couple of years ago, I had partnered with an organization that was hosting programs and workshops designed to educate New Yorkers around the industry and what was happening on the West Coast. And at one of those meetings, a young black man raised his hand and said, "What do I do about getting people who look like me in this industry?" And so we sat down and had a conversation, and from that, together with 3 other millennials, the 5 of us total, we started an organization called the Cannabis Cultural Association, which is a national organization based in New York. I'm proud to say that they are actually part of a federal lawsuit suing Jeff Sessions based on the unconstitutionality of scheduling marijuana as a Schedule I drug. They just recently, put in the news on February 14th, was a hearing in which the federal government tried to bring a motion to dismiss, and I understand it was not accepted by the judge at that time. I think it's under submission. So it's really interesting and exciting to see what happens as a result of that lawsuit. Personally, I am an adoptee. I have white parents, and my family is a rainbow coalition of various races. My young nephew just came out as a transgender boy. He is of Puerto Rican and Cape Verdean heritage. And through my work with CCA, I know that he's a statistic. And so it's really personal to me that not only does he have opportunities to participate in meaningful ways in this industry, but also that he has the freedom to partake in ways that everybody should. That's where I come at it. Thank you.
Again, my name is Isaac Colon, and so again, most of my career I've been on Wall Street. I've worked at Lehman Brothers and Goldman Sachs, both here in London and New York. And after working in the industry for about 10 years, me and 3 other college friends that I had, we said, you know what, maybe we should try to make some money for ourselves, not just make all our bosses really rich and get them another house in the Hamptons. So we scrounged up some money that we collected just from ourselves and our own personal savings, and we started Uncommon Partners LLC, really with the focus, as stated before, to make investments into small businesses and in urban communities. Specifically, we were trying to help people that look like us and my partners. As we were sort of looking for deals and looking for small business to invest in, I have always been interested in the cannabis industry, and one of my other friends from college, his wife, a recent MBA, was talking about leaving her job and starting a delivery platform for cannabis in Portland. So after speaking with her, looking at the idea and the business plan, me and my partners decided to invest. And then I jumped on board over at stemless.co, is the name of the delivery platform, and helped in that sort of like first year to really help with business development, website maintenance, database building, a bunch of various sales calls, marketing, whatever it was that needed to get done, I was there to help. And again, just doing more and more research into the business and the industry in a whole, I really realized it's a great place for growth. And I'm a big believer that education and entrepreneurship is like the ultimate sort of like game changer and field leveler. So when you're at a sort of industry as in the cannabis space that's really budding and still has a place where people can come in and make an impact at the ground level, this is the prime opportunity to strike right now in order, as being stated before, for communities of color and women not to get left behind, because as soon as federal legalization goes, in my opinion, once New York becomes legal and Florida becomes legal, you're going to start, I'll speak up a bit. Once New York becomes legal and once Florida becomes legal as well, you're really going to see big Wall Street money getting into it, and it's really going to price out any local or small entrepreneurs, just because some of the starting costs are already so heavy when you're looking to start a cannabis business that is touching the plant. So we need to get our stuff together now, and we need to start making action plans if you really want to participate in this industry, which is prime for the taking.
Each of you come from very different backgrounds, and your pathways to working in the cannabis industry look very different. Looking back at when you entered the industry, what are some of the things that you know, that you wish you had known then, that you do know now?
So I'd say one of the first things that the number of resources actually available, really from not just a nonprofit side, but, similar to what Wyatt said earlier, they're parallel and crossover to almost any natural, any traditional job, any traditional industry. And many times, I think, as a cannabis entrepreneur, especially early on, we felt cut off from a lot of those avenues. And even more so than cut off, didn't even want to approach a number of them because, whether it was due to prejudice against the industry or prejudice against the people we're working with. What I came to find out is that those prejudices were easy to break down, and in a lot of regards, people just want to see this plant and see everything move in this direction. So I think realizing that those resources are available, in addition to that, the nonprofit resources that are out there, they're willing to help, the MPPs, the SSDPs, relying on
The acronyms.
Oh yeah, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, Marijuana Policy Project, NORML, National Organization of Reform for Marijuana Laws. These organizations are there to help. They obviously need help as well, but I think that symbiotic relationship between the industry and the movement, none of it would be here without each other, really, at the end of the day. And relying on each other as resources has definitely helped move the industry, at least in Colorado and in the other legal states right now, along much faster than I think it would have. And had we relied on each other a little bit more at the start and worked together, it would have happened even faster. So,
for me, it was realizing that just because someone has smoked a joint doesn't mean they know how to run a cannabis business. It's a big mistake, because if you're trying to get into the business, you naturally gravitate toward people that say they're consultants, that they've been in the cannabis industry for X number of years, and there isn't a great vetting process to really understand who's really done what you're trying to do and who's really working at that. And so for me, it was spending an inordinate amount of money and time, and in this industry, time is money, working with people that really didn't know a lot more than I did, I came to find out, only after I had written the checks. So that is one of those, if I could go back and do that over, I would spend a lot more time researching who it is that I'm actually doing business with, and specifically, what have you done to help people like myself go through a process of getting their business moving forward.
Yeah, one of the things that I think, for me, I'm learning, at least 3 years into full participation in the industry for me, is that, we've been looking out west, and we've been looking to Colorado and Washington as examples of how our industry should look. And I truly believe that New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Eastern Seaboard, we're going to look very differently than what's happening out west for a number of reasons. We do business differently. We have epicenters of medicine and other communities that I just believe that it's going to be looking very differently. And so I think we need to concentrate as a tri-state area on looking at what's happening in Massachusetts. And I'd love to talk in a couple minutes, whenever appropriate, about what's happening there in terms of their lawmaking and how it's impacting, or how it will impact small businesses. I think we really need to focus on our geography, our demographics, our strengths and our weaknesses. We look very differently than Colorado does, just demographically, the way we live, the way that we cohabitate on top of each other, and especially in Manhattan. Home grow is going to be tough. We want it, but we have to figure out a way to make it make sense. So just understanding that while we can learn a lot of lessons from out west, we have to make something new that makes sense for the tri-state area.
Yeah, I think that one thing I've learned from my time in the cannabis industry is the power of the network. I know I've been, my experience on sort of Wall Street sometimes was that if you had an idea, keep it to yourself, you only let it out really in a small group of trusted people. I think it's maybe just a lesson in entrepreneurship in general, but I have noticed it in a sort of extreme way in the cannabis space is that people are happy to talk to you about the product, about their business, and there's a real sort of community of sharing ideas with cannabis entrepreneurs. That way you can sort of avoid some of the pitfalls that you're dealing with some bad people or consultants who maybe don't know as much as they have out there. You definitely see those, those sharks that are out there that are trying to make a quick buck. But I really feel like if you start talking within the community, going to networking events like this, and really educating yourself about people who are serious about the industry, you'll get those people those people will communicate to you on a quite regular basis, and you'll be able to really weed out, people who have really good intentions, who are looking to help you, and people who just really know what they're talking about, because anybody can sound really smart or educated in one conversation, but when you have multiple interactions with them, that's when you really start to kind of see, does this person actually know what they're talking about? And for the most part, all the really good, smart people that I know in cannabis are the ones who always text me more than I text them, and they're giving me all this information that I didn't know before. I mean, I use Kristen for that all the time.
So let's talk about some of those specific entrepreneurial opportunities that exist. Kristen, you mentioned that this area, this region, looks very different from other areas that have legalized cannabis. And so, Kristen, what do you see as the top opportunities for small business people in the New Jersey area?
Yeah, so after having said that we shouldn't look west, I think we do need to look west at what kind of opportunities are happening so that we can learn from those examples. And so in preparation for tonight, I kind of just went through and did some research on some of actual opportunities just to give you guys a sense of what we're seeing. So we're seeing some ancillary businesses in lodging, bed and breakfast. An example of New York-based attorney Joel Schneider opened Bud and Breakfast in Denver. He's now got 3 locations, charges $149 to $399 a night. His initial investment was $30 to $40K. I also want to bring up an example. Heidi Keys opened Puff Puff Pass in Denver, and that is a art painting and bring your own cannabis class. $2,000 investment in brushes, rental of space, easels, and some marketing material. She's now got operations in Washington, D.C. and in Oregon. She started with 8 students, and now she offers classes of up to 25 people. Over 150 people participate. Just a $2,000 investment. Florists, I hadn't even thought about this until I was researching. Beck Coop is the woman's name. Buds and Blossoms in Centennial, Colorado. She does marijuana-enhanced arrangements for weddings. Folks buy their own bud, present retail receipts so that she doesn't run afoul of the law, and she creates beautiful bouquets for weddings and different events. Her initial investment was $1,500, flowers, vases, and some design embellishments. She did one wedding, and by word of mouth was able to grow her business. Bike dispensary tours. I thought that was interesting. A $20,000 investment with rental bikes, accessories, rain caps, raincoats, and insurance. A guy named Todd Roll in Portland, Oregon, pedal bike tours. He does a $69 3-hour Portland dispensary tour. He just takes folks from dispensary to dispensary and does not touch the plant whatsoever. There's ice cream at the end of that tour. Medical marijuana delivery services. Guys, delivery services are really very low entry points and low barriers to entry for a lot of different states. Kevin McCarty formed an organization called EASE in San Francisco. He calls it an Uber for medical marijuana delivery. The drivers actually work for the dispensaries who connect with EASE. The drivers get $16 an hour, and the dispensaries pay to list the drivers. His initial investment was all about the app development and some computers, $400,000. Industry consulting. Depending on your skill set and how it translates into the industry, that varies in terms of your initial outlay. But some consulting areas that I've seen, certainly branding, marketing, PR, compliance, security, legal, cultivation, processing, insurance, and funding. Extraction, processing, lab equipment. So lab equipment sales. That's a huge industry. There are a lot of lab equipment companies that don't want to service this industry. And so Bert Linnetz, Pacific Combustion Engineering in Torrance, California. He was a lab equipment supplier for 15 years and moved over to fill this need in the cannabis space, formed a company called Blaze Lab Solutions, and now features extraction equipment. Dispensary space designer. Website, some graphic software, CAD software, Megan Stones, very high-end exclusive, and pairs with cannabis, as opposed to edible meals, which just doesn't pair. Security companies, this is also a huge industry. I'm hearing actually noise in New Jersey about folks getting the appropriate licensing and just marketing themselves as security companies so that they can get the licensing to allow them to do other things, and then ultimately will likely build a separate sister company to do the cannabis security. Edible, of course, is why I mentioned edible products. I mean, that's one of the fastest growing ancillary businesses. And that, of course, that initial investment varies depending on whether you run retail or wholesale. Beauty products, CBD products, infused beauty products, THC. That runs the gamut from creams, lotions, balms, aids, bath products, makeup, accessories and hardware devices. I mean, vape stores, glass pipe cartridges, papers, decarboxylizers. A friend of mine out of Boston has a company called Ardent. She has a consumer decarboxylizer that she sells online. Butter extractors, either as inventors or salespeople. So of course, we can't leave the conversation without talking about technology and app development. You're looking at companies called like Weed Maps, which is fancy themselves the Yelp of cannabis. Leafly, which is another great resource for not only news material, information on seeds and strain, and industry information as well. Seed to sale tracking software. There's always room for improvement. If you're watching the news, there are there's a handful of operators in that space, and they still suffer glitches within their systems. Analytics is a huge area where I'm seeing a lot of folks interested in this space. Social networks as well. Another area, job boards, professional headhunting. That's going to be a huge need in this area. There's a couple companies that are operating in the space, but not based in the tri-state area. THC Staffing is based out of Boston. 420 Careers, Weed Hire, I believe are both in the Pacific Northwest. nonprofit organizations, social justice organizations, affinity groups. There are ways to participate with these groups and also be profitable. Nonprofits don't have to, operate on shoestrings. Let's see. Professional networking. I personally have started 2 organizations, the Asian Cannabis Roundtable and a companion group called the Latinx Cannabis Roundtable. And our missions for both organizations are simply to help each other in the industries that we are currently in, but keeping us abreast of all the industry information and educating us in the process so that we don't lose anything as we continue to try to feed ourselves without this industry. Packaging, labeling, and certainly that varies from state to state in terms of compliance. And event planning, standalone one-day events, festivals, parades, all these things are happening out west, and they're owned by small business owners. Tour guides, travel. We can't not talk about tourism. There are huge opportunities around that. One of the most fun things that I did when I was in Denver is there are services that will pick you up from the airport. They play a 20-minute video to instruct you on the laws and compliance, and then they take you on a tour of all the dispensaries. How fantastic would that be to operate out of New York? Wellness and nutrition events. We hear about yoga events, wellness retreats, various things like that. I really see these as low entry points, things that don't necessarily require licensing, and will have low startup costs as well. So it would be great opportunities for marginalized communities and other groups.
So there's clearly a wide variety and a long list of opportunities that are available, and it's not just limited to the opportunities that Kristen mentioned, right? We can always think outside of the box here. Why and Eric, are there any other ancillary industries in Colorado that you think might spark some inspiration here in New Jersey?
Well, I think one of the easiest routes in, obviously, that everyone needs right away is contracting of any type. So your traditional trades, electricians, plumbers, all of that. Obviously, as all these businesses start, they all need that support first and foremost, especially when you're talking about the primary businesses of cultivating, manufacturing, and retail. In many cases, especially with the cultivation and the manufacturing, you've got specialty requirements that are in there that cost a lot of money. From a contracting perspective, you can make a lot of money doing it, especially getting on the extraction side, the butane extraction or CO2 extraction, for example. C1 Div 1, Class 1 Div 1 rooms, which are required for all, basically all extraction techniques. Probably some of the most expensive per square foot construction there is on the planet. So looking at that from a traditional standpoint, there's a lot of money to be made there in support of these companies as they get started and as they expand. So that'd be the first thing that came to mind.
I think other than the list that Christine went down, it's also opportunities for photographers. You go into every dispensary and there are beautiful photographs of the plant in various stages. And there's one woman, and I hate that I don't remember her name. She has kind of cornered the market, if you will. She's at every conference with her beautiful photographs of different strains of the plant. So again, she was a photographer by trade, and she just moved over to the cannabis world. I think also there are opportunities if you're an educator. There are companies that are springing up. Maybe you've heard of Oaksterdam University out of the Bay Area. They do a weekend seminar. 3 days, people from all over the country are in this 3-day session, really teaching you from A to Z everything there is to know about cannabis, not only the scientific side of it, but also the sales and procurement side. Jewelry, do you make jewelry? Well, there's a woman in Colorado that's making jewelry, very high-end pieces, I might add, the cannabis leaf all done in diamonds. So there again, whatever it is that you do, there's an opportunity for you to migrate over into the cannabis world. I have a friend that's a in security. He's doing cannabis security now. All the dispensaries need that. And then waste management. I don't think people think about the fact that when the product is gone through extraction, there are the elements of the plant that have to be disposed of. You can't just throw it away. So literally there are service companies that come around to all the dispensaries and pick that material up and dispose of it properly. Again, we talked about app development. You know, Microsoft is developing apps for the cannabis industry now, particularly seed to sale. So you have a company like Microsoft that is not being shy about being in this business regimen.
Can you describe seed to sale for folks who might not be aware of what it is?
It's literally the tracking of the plant from the time that it is not really a seed, more like a clone. And you have to track it at each step as its growing phases that the Marijuana Enforcement Division mandates. So they know where that plant is at all points in time. They know what the yield of that plant is. And then once the yield comes off the plant, they also know how it's sold, how much of it went to edibles, or did you put it into your dispensary. So it is literally a tracking system that doesn't leave a lot of room, wiggle room, if you will, for folks to not be honest about what's happening with the plant. So you have Microsoft now that's writing seed-to-sale software apps. So again, you also have Miracle Grow. Think about the business that Miracle Grow's in. They're in the business of growing plants. Well, I think cannabis is a plant. And so why would they let someone else come in and take that market share away from them? It's a quiet investment that they're putting into the business, but nonetheless, it's happening. And so you'll also see very large Wall Street firms now that are at all of the conferences. If you'd gone to the conferences 6 or 7 years ago, it was still tie-dyed and hippies. You go there now and everybody's suited down. So obviously it has come to a point where folks are really recognizing it is here to stay. It is still in its infancy, and there's still plenty of opportunity for people to get involved with this plant and make some money at the end of the day.
Yeah, I would say Scott's Miracle Grow, they're not being quiet about it. They, on their quarterly reports, they show the growth of their stock price. Like, hey, yes, because of cannabis, we are getting, our ticker is going up. I mean, they're quite open about it, letting analysts know about that. They're not quiet at all. Waste management is also a great opportunity. One of the investment that my team missed out on because somebody else came in and offered a better price was for a cleaning service out in Denver, and they were on the steps to start franchising over in other states. So I mean, there's a lot of sort of different opportunities out there.
And so Kristen mentioned a lot of opportunities that don't cost $15,000 or $30,000, some that are much lower cost. But if you still want to start a business that does touch the plant, you're looking at a lot of money. So Isaac, what are some of the important financing considerations that people should keep in mind as they think about building a business in this industry?
Isaac,
oh, sorry about that. Can everybody hear me now? I'm trying to keep it at this volume. All right, so I think that anytime new entrepreneurs coming into any sort of new small business, you really have to know your numbers really well and be quite conservative in how you're going to project future cash flow and what costs are going to be. In particular, in the cannabis space, that becomes extra difficult because you cannot write off all the same sort of taxes and business costs that you would have associated if you were just opening up like a restaurant or a diner normally. So you really have to give yourself a lot of runway. If you're going to be starting a new business, that's going to be touching the plant because there are a lot of regulations, there are a lot of application fees, and there's a lot of upfront cost that comes with that, right? Kristen did list a bunch of businesses that you might not require all that upfront cost, but that doesn't mean that you should just shy away from, I'm going to start a business not touching the plant at all. I think where you have to, again, be extra careful is that most cannabis entrepreneurs, they will not be able to get traditional funding from like a small business association or from a traditional bank. So you have to use potentially alternative investors or investments coming from alternative lenders, and you have to be really, really careful about that. I definitely see, in my experience, a lot of alternative lenders taking advantage of new business owners that may not really understand some of the fine print that they are signing, and they can get locked into a small business loan that has really, really high interest rates, and their business may not be able to sustain and pay off that debt. I've also seen small business owners partner with people who are investors, and they promise them networking and space and a bunch of other things, and they give up a fairly large chunk of equity in their company, and they really don't get that return on the back of it. And then a lot of times those investors could just use you with the idea, knowing, yes, this business is going to be going down. I know on the contract that I sold, that I signed with them, I would be able to retain all their physical assets, their plants, potentially their license that they received, and it can really put an entrepreneur in a bad situation. So you have to be really careful about what you sign and who you are partnering up with, and do not be afraid to ask the extra question. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, and you should definitely utilize your network if you don't feel like you have the expertise, where you can actually maybe go still to a small business association and say, hey, I'm starting this business. I know you guys cannot give me money, but I do need help looking at this legal contract that I'm about to sign with a potential investor or a lender, and they will help you out with that to ensure that you're not being taken advantage of. On the other side, there are a lot of excellent platforms that are out there that are willing to work in the cannabis space, especially a lot of crowdfunding sort of websites. Things like Seed Invest. Now, Seed Invest is a platform where any business that you may have, you can go out and put that on there, and it will crowdsource investment into that company by issuing out a convertible note, right? And if you don't know what a convertible note is, before you sign up for that platform, you should know what that is, right? It's just really important that there are tools out there, but you really need to do your homework. And if you don't understand the language that's in there, do not be afraid or feel that like your ego is going to be bruised if you don't understand it. Ask the question. Most people will explain it to you, and if somebody is not willing to explain it to you, then you need to find somebody that will.
So before we move on to the next question, I just want to remind folks, if you have a question, we have a little bit about how New Jersey can promote equity and diversity within the new industry. We have seen from other legalized states having to play catch up and having to try to encourage a diverse pool of applicants after they've already brought in legalization. And here in New Jersey, we want to make sure that we have our system set up from the beginning in a way that facilitates and really encourages inclusivity, and we want to build a cannabis industry here in New Jersey that reflects the diversity of our garden state, not just in terms of demographics, but also in terms of geography. So Eric and Y, can you start us off by telling us about what successes and failures you have seen in creating a diverse industry in Colorado?
So I think one of the first things that Colorado got right was not putting a cap on any of the licensing numbers. As much of a pain in the ass as it was for regulators, it allowed the free market to be exactly that. I really hope that New Jersey follows suit and allows as many retail licenses as possible. I was telling a brief anecdote earlier, just from a money standpoint, a safety standpoint, 80 licenses makes 0 cents. The state of Arizona currently has about 96 operating medical marijuana dispensaries doing almost $500 million in business. There's 170,000 patients in a state with a little over 5 million people doing that. Like I said, that's medical. So 80 licenses makes no sense. From a law enforcement standpoint, they're out of their minds. I really, really hope that they get it right and they open up at least the retail side to as many qualified applicants as they can without putting a cap. So I think that, first and foremost, from all across the board, it makes sense from diversity, from law enforcement, from safety. That would be probably the biggest lesson that we learned there. It works. At the end of the day, it's business. You're going to succeed or you're going to fail, but it shouldn't be capped out ahead of time. Failures, I've seen the other side of that also. In 2014, I helped found an American Trade Association of Cannabis and Hemp based out of Philadelphia. We worked in Maryland trying to help the diversity program there. It failed. They obviously, with corruption and a number of other reasons, it did not go well, and a lot of that's caught up in lawsuits. Still, Pennsylvania's still out. We're not sure how that's going to completely wind up, but once again, I think there's lessons to be learned from each of those states, and I'm really hoping that the legislators here in New Jersey are paying attention.
I am really impressed with something that Michigan has done, and Michigan has started to do a series of classes and sessions, and they're even online. So what they did is they divided the state and have these sessions one every other weekend, I believe. And the sessions are to really inform the general public and those interested in getting in the business exactly what the cannabis business is about, again, from A to Z. And what this does is it now allows a cultural perspective to take place in these classes, because you don't know what you don't know. And so having an opportunity to go into that type of an environment where it's safe, it's a learning environment, everyone's getting the same information at the same time, and then they can go out and make informed decisions about what type of licenses are going to be available, how many are going to be available, what part of the business do they actually want to be a part of, how much money is it going to cost, what licensing do they need, what are the background requirements. So I think states that are taking that proactive approach, which at the end of the day, part of the reason they're doing it is to make sure they have an inclusive environment with people when those licenses are finally issued, I think is a really good idea.
So in New York, we have a governor problem. You used to have a governor problem, and we don't have a governor problem anymore. In Massachusetts, they have a governor problem. And I'd like to talk just for a couple minutes, because I think it's important for us to understand what's happening there. So a year ago, by ballot initiative, they passed recreational adult use in Massachusetts. As a result, a 5-person commission was formed. It's called the Cannabis Control Commission. Of those 5 members who were appointed by the governor, 4 of them voted against legalization. Only one person, Shalene Title, who is an alum from SSDP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy. She's an attorney. She is a consultant in the space for many years. The only one of those 5 who has actually participated in the industry from both an activist perspective and an industry perspective. Excuse me. And so that commission has been set up, and for the last few months they've been on what's called a listening tour, to listen to communities, to see what people want in terms of legalization, and they're tasked with setting up the rules and regs for the program. I believe today was the last day that they can receive comment from the public based on that listening tour. Very similarly, Diana, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that in the legalization bill in New Jersey, there is going to be a similar commission. I don't know if it's a 3 or 5-person commission, I forget, but also appointed by the governor. And they will also be tasked with some sort of a listening tour. I think that they have an obligation to put on 2 educational events in every county, something along those lines, during that rulemaking period. So we're in the rulemaking period. They're taking comment from public. They're, publicly talking about the licensing structure that they want to establish, which would include protections around small businesses. So licensing, let's see, here we got spas, cafes, delivery services, movie theaters, areas where small business owners can get more affordable licenses. Also targeting consumption spaces. And I think, for me, that's very important for where we are in the tri-state area. Consumption spaces are something that we really need to think about in terms of subsidized housing, just communal housing in the way that we live in New York City especially, and very much so in New Jersey as well. So the governor just issued a letter and a directive, I think it was last week or the week prior, to the Cannabis Commission saying that they are overreaching. He would like them to slow down the process and to limit the scope of the licensing structure that we want to implement. He would rather see the existing medical community be able to obtain those licenses, just expand their existing operations, and allow other individuals to come in at that high level, high cost licensing level of a cultivator, producer, or retail. These other smaller scale licenses that are, again, more affordable and more impactful, to be honest, in specific communities, he'd like that to sit and park and wait. He cites the reasons for this as public safety, diversion, impact on youth, increased impairment during driving, and all these issues. Out west, we've addressed these. We've come up with regulations around them to figure that out. The statistics don't show that youth use is up, quite frankly, and unless I do something, just the opposite. Thanks, Mike. Same with impaired driving. We're not seeing that. We're just not seeing those results. And I just heard an MIT professor speak about this. There's no way to determine at this point when consumption happened during those impaired driving situations in a lot of scenarios. And Diana, you probably can speak to that better than I. So, it's really important. We're talking right now about a regulated industry. It's important for folks who want to participate in this industry to step up now as activists, to let your lawmakers know. I think that's the point of why we're here tonight, is to talk about all of these things that need to be included in your legalization bill. We can't just have, broad strokes legalization. We really need to think about how this is impacting communities and where, different entry points for different communities can come into the industry.
I think real quick, I forgot about this one, especially Chris and John remember on it. It's one that's a little counterintuitive to small businesses at first, but it's something that we fought for originally that wound up hurting and putting out of business a lot of small businesses, and that was the exclusion of out-of-state investment. The protectionist philosophy does not work. What it winds up doing is it limits financing opportunities for small businesses to the point where they end up dying on the vine. I've watched more small businesses, more of my friends, and people that I truly care about go out of business because there's just not enough money in one state to build an industry the size that we built. Unfortunately, it took us, for a lot of people, it was a little too late when we finally passed it. 7 years in to the industry in Colorado. So I would recommend to keep that on the table. I wouldn't push it out. As counterintuitive as it may sound to small businesses, you don't ever want to cut your feet off before you start running.
So we are actually running a little ahead of schedule, which is great. So, which is wonderful because we have a ton of questions, and I want to be able to get to at least a sizable portion of them. So, for our last regular scheduled question for the panelists, can you each share the one top piece of advice that you would offer to aspiring cannabis entrepreneurs who hope to enter the market in New Jersey when we legalize adult use here? What's your one top piece of advice?
Know your business. So, and by that I mean stay focused. It's really easy to come down with the shiny penny syndrome and start chasing every loose end. I think understanding and knowing what you want to do and following that through has definitely helped me more than probably anything else, because there's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of opportunity out there as this industry emerges in new states. Talking about here, $2 to $3 billion industry probably in 5 years. So ancillary-wise, there are opportunities everywhere. So just stay focused, and keep your eye on the prize.
Get a really good attorney. And good, in quotation marks, they're all good, they're attorneys. But get an attorney that's a business development attorney. That's one that has relationships in the industry, and one that can, you can utilize the synergy that they've developed by meeting and being around a lot of different people in a lot of different aspects of the industry. That's been one of the saviors for me, is having an attorney who is always thinking of not just about how many billable hours I'm going to get. Sorry, Christian. But I don't mind paying those billable hours if it means that there's a deal or an opportunity for me that the attorney has put together or brought people together. In fact, I think our attorney brought us together. And so it's really important that you have that kind of trust in an individual that you know is there to not only just help you out when you need it, but also is always thinking about their clients in a very different way as a business development officer.
It's funny that you mentioned that. So I just had a meeting with the partners in my firm the other day to talk about providing a product for small businesses. When folks can't afford our New York City attorney fees, but I very much want to support this industry, and so we've come up with a product that will allow us to, sit with a client and really talk about whether or not they need certain licensing, where they're able to do certain steps in terms of forming corporate formation and just have an attorney oversight. So we're working on ways to really service the small business arena, which is important to me. But in terms of my advice, I'm the attorney, so compliance. I mean, this is still a Schedule I drug, guys.
I guess my advice would probably tell any entrepreneur that I'm reviewing their business and the business plan's over is know your numbers. I guess you shouldn't be surprised, but I'm sometimes surprised when somebody's coming to me with either help needing to fundraising or they're looking for investment through my partnership directly, and I ask them very simple questions about their numbers and their projections, and I get blank faces or I get nonsense answers that really don't add up. It just really, if you do that when you're on your rounds to raise cash, it just really puts a bad taste in investors' mouths. So just know your numbers, right? Even if you're not good at it, then study it extra. You don't need to be the accountant on your team. You should be able to be prepared to speak to the numbers on a spreadsheet or whatever your business plan may be, and execute. The difference between a successful business and a business that is kicking the bucket, a lot of times comes to execution. People have the same idea. Idea one wins because they have people who execute the idea versus lollygag.
Great. So thank you for all of your thoughts and sharing your experiences. So now we're going to head to the Q&A portion. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of questions. So I apologize in advance if we are not able to answer a specific question.
Thanks for coming.
But we will do our best. So first question, this was for Isaac and Y. So a little while ago, Jeff Sessions, our dear friend in Washington, made an announcement that at the federal level, he is no friend of cannabis, and he made an announcement that would actually reverse the federal government's position on staying out of the way of states that wanted to legalize cannabis. Have you seen any impacts that have happened on the ground in Colorado since this announcement?
No. I think again, speaking of having a good attorney, our attorney put out a position paper for all of their clients, and the position paper really kind of broke down what Sessions did, and more importantly, what he didn't do. And from our perspective, the state's attorney generals have always had the ability to enforce marijuana laws. That didn't change because of the Coleman law. When Sessions has recently done in reversing that is really telling, again, states attorneys general that they now have enforcement ability. Well, they always had enforcement ability. So at the end of the day, it's back in the hands of the states, and we don't see the Sessions reversal as anything for us to be in an uproar about at this point in time.
Yeah, I would say, if anything, it might have scared away sort of fairly large investors who were maybe getting a little bit more like, I'm ready to invest in the cannabis space. But I think from like an everyday operational point of view, it made headlines, maybe giving people a bit of a spook, but you're kind of running business as normal. I think at this point in time, two faces out of the tube. You know, the president that's in session now, right now, is all about jobs. And if he came in and they started cracking down on businesses that have been operating legally within a state, I think that would be very bad news for him and do a lot to damage consumer sort of confidence in the market. So I really think at this point in time, you know, we've gone a little too far to kind of be worried about that. I mean, something could happen. It's there, and people can go to jail for this, but I don't see it going down that route, personally.
Part of the impetus, though, behind what Sessions did really had to do with New Year's Eve. And anybody watch the ball drop on New Year's Eve? Anybody see the CNN reporter with the joint hand on New Year's Eve? So you have to think about the timing, and you have a situation where you're doing something in their face. And so Sessions had to do something. And we just need to understand the optics of this. That was broadcast around the world. And it's kind of a slap in their face if you think about it in terms of what transpired. So I remember sitting there on New Year's Eve thinking, oh, this is not going to be good. And it was literally days later that Sessions did his thing.
I think the most telling sign that actually happened about 2 weeks ago when the Treasury Secretary came out and further backed the current FINRA rules, which in all reality, the FINRA memo, which is the Financial Crimes, or FinCEN memo that was put out, is really the only memo that carries any water for us, because that's the one that allows banking to occur. So when the federal government backed that memo, it really made no difference what they did with the other memo. And they want their money. The IRS wants to make sure that they can continue to tax us unfairly.
So one thing that we have to remember here in New Jersey is that unfortunately we haven't legalized cannabis yet, there are no licensing options just yet. There is no place where we can go and set up a dispensary, or unless you're talking a medicinal dispensary, and even then, like, access into the medicinal program here in New Jersey is extremely limited. So just a reminder that we're still in the formation phases of building the legislation here in New Jersey. And again, that requires your help. Just this morning, the Legislative Black Caucus in New Jersey had a hearing in Jersey City on marijuana legalization. So they are opening the doors for people to come in and to share their opinions. And not everybody in the Black Caucus is supportive of legalization. Not everybody in the legislature is supportive of legalization. So they need to hear from you. And we have out there, we have action items, 8 action steps that you can take starting today to help shape this campaign and make sure legalization happens. Because if the supportive folks, the folks on the ground don't get loud and have their voices heard, we're going to get left out. And that's what we're trying to do. So the next question, because it is marijuana possession is still illegal on the federal level, banking. There are still some banking limitations. So how are businesses that operate in legal jurisdictions, how do they handle their money?
Yeah, so even in Colorado, I think we're just over 50% of the legal businesses have bank accounts. We still operate, a lot of businesses still operate on a cash basis or on a hidden basis. We call it a cash basis. Everybody pretty much has a bank account. It just may not be in their actual business's name. So you've got a lot of DBAs, which the MED doesn't like, but they understand. MED, Marijuana Enforcement Division, which is basically a Colorado Department of Revenue, their enforcement arm. As Kristen said, the credit unions are pretty much the ones jumping in, at least right now. We just got, I think, approval last week on the 4th credit union in Colorado from the Fed, the Four Corners Credit Union, which had gone through 2 or 3 years of applications trying to get registered, and they finally succeeded. So it is starting to open up. I think as Bruce has said, having the FinCEN memo kept in place was huge. It really, that was, I think, the biggest fear in the whole industry from the Cole memo being drawn back was if they went after the FinCEN memo, because that would have been a dagger. I think that truly shows where this administration lies on it. Sessions and Trump don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, really, but I think on this one, he's a politician through and through. Obviously, all he cares about is polling. Literally, when he's watching Fox News or on Fox News polls, and you've got 57% of Republicans at this point backing legal marijuana, it's a death blow at the federal level, especially on a mass election, to go against it or to go out and really axe it.
For me, my business is done through a licensing agreement, and so I don't actually touch the plant, and so there's no issue with me having a bank account. I would tell you though, try when you're opening a bank account to, do sensible things like don't have part of your name, we sell weed. Probably not going to improve your account, right?
I'm part of a hemp consulting business, Just Consulting. My partner is a farmer in Kentucky. One of our clients, we had a bank account with Citibank for a little over a year. One of our new clients is the Vermont Hemp Company, which is a licensed company that deals in food products. As soon as we cashed that first check, Citibank called and said we have 5 days to find a new account. For the nonprofit, the Cannabis Cultural Association, it took us a little over a month to find a bank. No national bank would open it. We did not do anything but put on educational programs. We found a credit union.
We've been through about 14 different banks in 9 years.
And so how do folks get more information about investors and lenders and financing options? Where should they look to get resources on that issue?
There are a lot of sort of resources out there. Again, you have to be very careful. They have a lot of essentially incubators and small VCs that will be happy to invest in any cannabis business, whether that be plant touching or not. But again, you have to be very careful about sort of what you're signing up for. I've seen some incubators that are out there, and essentially they say they're going to give you space and they're going to give you business consulting, but when you sign the contract and they're going to give you like $40,000, it's a loan and it's a pretty high interest rate, and there's a royalty if you have a consumer product. So you have to be very careful. I do like a lot of the new crowdfunding platforms that are out there. Circle Up, Seed Invest. A lot of them have shown promise that they would allow cannabis companies to market on their platforms. Stemless.co, the delivery platform that I invested in Portland. We just did a round a couple of months ago on Seed Invest, and we raised $250,000 on a convertible note. The platforms do differ on sort of the size of the business that they're going to be willing to work with, but you have to kind of like dig your heels in and sort of like really get to work to find sort of lenders. The easiest way to do it generally is to have that first sort of like angel and family and friends round, and I would say you probably don't know there's a little bit more money in your network than you probably know. Especially if you're going to start an ancillary business where you maybe only need $10,000. And as long as you put a proper business plan together, and I think that you can really articulate what your business plan is, you should be able to be successful and raise that round. And again, if you're in a business that's not touching a plant, give a try to those traditional lenders, small business associations. You just have to be very careful on how you present yourself. So if you are going to start a yoga studio that's going to have cannabis in it, you don't need to really express that there's going to be cannabis there. You're opening a yoga studio, right? If you're opening up a consulting company for cannabis businesses, why limit yourself to cannabis business? Say you're going to be consulting for small businesses, right? Is it dishonest? Not really. You got to game the system a little. It happens in life. You don't have to necessarily say everything up front. And again, if you put your LLC together in a certain way, if you're going to be a food company, hey, we're doing dinner parties and we're making food. Part of that business could be cannabis that technically comes in later and stuff like that. So, there are ways to get around it. So, you could be growing cannabis in Utah illegally, putting it across the border, selling it in a dispensary, money's transferring over. It becomes very murky on there, and that's how come being national banks stay away, and credit unions, again, usually stay within the state, so they feel more comfortable that the money is not necessarily going to be jumping all over the place. Thank you.
So we have a question about research. Is there currently a research industry around cannabis, or will there be once we legalize?
Is that a medical question or analytic?
Let's go general. General research around cannabis and in studying the plant, how can we further develop tools and technology that can help us? How can cannabis be used in innovation?
I would say yes, there are research companies out there. New Frontier Data is a newsletter I read every day, Entrepreneur. These are all sort of websites and companies that specialize in getting industry knowledge, statistics, business stats, new trends in legal, technology, medical spaces. So they're already out there, for sure.
I think on the, talking about the plant itself, there are a lot of opportunities that haven't been harvested yet. Looking back, 2013, we started working with the University of Colorado and their Cannabis Genomics Research Initiative, which was, at the time, was the first real research institute in the country that had a dedicated budget to cannabis. At this point, having just gotten out of Pennsylvania over the past 3 years, there are a number of universities there that we're getting into. And as more states come online from a medical standpoint, we're finding that there are more and more universities willing to jump in, and universities that have extra budgets. So just be open to it. Go to it. That's what we did at CU. It ended up working. It took us a couple of years to break through, but any connections that you have at the university level, there are funds out there. So it'd be hard to find sometimes, but you'd be surprised how many professors and research programs want to study cannabis.
In terms of medical research, I know it would shock and surprise you all to know that there are a number of doctors in our Asian Cannabis Roundtable professional networking group. We have represented, I think it's the top 3 largest palliative care hospitals in New York. And what they say is that because they receive federal funding, they find it very difficult to get research money for cannabis research.
What are some great resources for educating oneself about cultivation or bud tending or other duties or functions of working in the cannabis industry?
I mentioned earlier Oaksterdam University. They have 2 and 3 day classes. It really covers the gamut of everything that you just mentioned from there, and you'll find when you go to the class, probably 50% of it are interested in horticulture part of the business, but the rest of the class is dedicated to dispensary operations, grow houses, extraction processes. There's even a food and beverage edibles section for the class as well. So that's one way. I think the other way is there is a ton of information online that if you just avail yourself of, and all you have to do is subscribe once, and every day they're going to send you some information, and you'll be surprised. You know how it works when you start on one end and 3 hours later you're someplace else. Well, it's no different with cannabis, the cannabis subject. It'll range from legal information to growing information to investments to you name it. And so just please sign up for any of the newsletters that are out there that were mentioned earlier, and you'll get more than enough information. And it'll lead you to the proper place if you want a more formalized educational process.
Another one, Cloverleaf University out of Colorado. Those guys, they do a pretty good job as well. One of my other businesses, Isolate Extraction Systems. We build CO2 extractors. We actually offer a class in Colorado that you can sign up for. You have to fly out, but it's a 1-week training session to learn how to operate supercritical CO2 extraction units. So there are a number of businesses that also offer training, mostly ancillary businesses, but it's definitely out there.
What was the name of that CO2 class?
So isolatesystems.com. Just hit them up. We offer it about once a month.
We had a question about marijuana expungements and the reasoning behind that. So the reason we believe marijuana expunging people's records is so important is because a single arrest for marijuana possession has a lot of consequences in people's lives. Not only are you risking jail time or facing fines up to like $1,000, but you can lose your job. You can lose your housing. You can lose your student financial aid if you're a student. If you're an immigrant, you can be deported. You can be banned from adoption, and you can have the custody of your children jeopardized. So we think that as we move forward into a legalized system here in New Jersey, it is only right for us to stop forcing people to continue bearing the stigma and the collateral consequences of an arrest for behavior we are saying is now legal. We think to do otherwise is disingenuous and does a disservice to the movement. Next question is about comparing states. So which state currently has the most successful or entrepreneur-friendly market and why? Or why not?
Well, yeah, years ago I just said Colorado. It's gotten pretty saturated. There's still a lot of opportunity in the ancillary space, though, in the sports space. This year, hopefully, fingers crossed, we're going to pass a social use bill, which would create another state licensing category, basically creating a bar liquor license type of model for cannabis, creating off-site consumption areas that are legal for people to use, which we currently don't have outside of just the city of Denver, where they've only issued 3 licenses ever. So I think that being said, Colorado, you've got that. Oregon is suffering kind of the same issue right now with a little bit of overproduction. That's one of the downfalls of having a wide open free market is it fills up fast. But it took each one of us, Oregon and Colorado, years to get there. I'd say California. Right now, there's more opportunity in California probably than anywhere. From an ancillary, the municipalities are opening up pretty rapidly. Once again, when you just look at the sheer numbers in Colorado at 5.5 million people, pushing 1.5 billion to 2 billion hopefully in the next couple of years. California could be to 10 to 12 very, very rapidly. And then here, I think New Jersey is probably, depending on how they craft these rules, this could be the most fertile new state that we've seen in a very, very long time. So we're really excited for everybody here.
I would suggest keeping an eye on New York as well. The current legalization bill that's pending includes micro licenses, which we have not seen in any state as far as I know.
Can you describe what that is?
So micro licenses will be modeled after the microbrewery industry licenses that we have in New York. So, out in Brooklyn, we have microbreweries all over the place these days. And that's what the licensing model is going to be modeled after. So I think that's really exciting. It's, again, another lower entry point for small businesses to participate. Not that I'm aware of, not the same sort of structure. A micro license will allow you to do full vertical.
So that means, growing and processing and selling marijuana all under one roof.
Yep. I think it's going to be determined by canopy.
So speaking of canopy, so once states become a legalized jurisdiction, for people who are interested in operating grow facilities, where do you get your seeds?
Birds.
But you can't cross state lines, right? With seed, so I can't go to Colorado with seed, right?
Online?
Technically.
So I think Massachusetts was the first one to kind of say, okay, here's the process. You have 3 days where we're going to turn our back.
Wow.
And you didn't have to tell them where they came from. Colorado, they just miraculously showed up. And we get a lot of birds from Canada, mass migration. So. It has not been tackled yet. It's chicken and egg.
So we've gotten a lot of questions about zoning and licensing and how much it would cost to get a license. So for the zoning question, well, for both of those questions, it's still to be determined. So the legislation is still being developed, right? So there's still opportunity for us to make sure that the licensing fees aren't $30,000, $40,000, that they're actually low enough for people to actually access them. And for the zoning requirements, zoning conversations have to happen on 2 levels. Not just the state level, but also at the municipal level. So New Jersey is a home rule state. We love to be in local control. And when you have 567 municipalities, it's hard to get everybody on the same page, right? So we are likely to see kind of a bit of a patchwork of zoning requirements across the state. Some municipalities have already come out and said, we don't want any part of this. We are not going to allow any marijuana businesses in our town. Other cities have come out and said, yes, please, welcome. We welcome new businesses and new entrepreneurs here in our community. But so those conversations are still happening. There's nothing that is firmly set in stone just yet on both the zoning front and the cost to actually get a license, which again requires that we get active because we want each and every one of you to contact your legislators to let them know that the licensing fees should be low enough to allow small business people to enter the market. We cannot afford to price out our own residents here in New Jersey, and that just wouldn't be fair for us.
The petition on our website, they can find that.
Yes, great. Thank you, E. So if you go to our website, if you go to njumr.org/action-center, I'll repeat that, njumr.org/action-center. That website is also noted on the Take Action page that most of you have, and if you don't have it, it's at the front table.
Can we do that one more time?
Yes. njumr.org/action-center. That takes you to our Action Center page, where you can take those 8 action steps. One of those action steps is signing a petition, signing a letter to your lawmakers. We have already drafted the letter for you. All you have to do is a couple clicks, enter your name, and we will match you to your legislator. And you can send off the letter that tells them this is what legislation needs to be a racial justice and a social justice bill. So go to our Action Center on the NJUMR website. We have a question about handling and storing cash earnings. So we've talked about the fact that a lot of this is operating in cash. Is there more to say on how to handle and store your cash when you're operating in this business?
It's been a few years, but no, we still get, like I said, probably 20-30% of deposits in cash. We operate solely from a wholesale standpoint, so 70% or so is coming in checks. With our current relationship with the credit union we work with, we actually we have armored personnel cars show up at the facility and pick up cash twice a week. While it's on site, it's all locked up. certified safes that the MED has to be aware of. So before that, Western Union, figuring out cash. I mean, it's the cash business, so it was not easy. I see large opportunities for cash to disappear. So luckily, that's become less of an issue than it was. It is still an issue though. So at this point, just having security, armored personnel, and good safes.
Do any of you know any examples of anyone using like cryptocurrency in the space? And do you see opportunities for that to be used in the space they were in banking situation?
There are businesses that are out there that are creating tokens, essentially, that a network of dispensaries could use. So like a marijuana token or a cannabis token, and you essentially pay, customers will pay cash to that token creator, and then the dispensaries do have relationships that they will submit their tokens to the dispensary, and essentially they'll get checks from the crypto company every couple of days, or they'll get cash deposits if they have cash. For example, my company, Stemless, we actually do have a bank account, and we do process clients' credit cards when they place an order online with us, and then we issue checks or cash to the dispensaries as needed. But yes, cryptocurrencies are coming into play to fulfill that cash risk.
Yeah, I think I've seen more cryptocurrency being used in like LA, probably anywhere. A lot of the LA dispensaries are switching over to Bitcoin and they're figuring out ways that they can use it. Blockchain is starting to get used on the security side a little bit more, and there's going to be some, over the coming years, you'll see more and more. I think companies starting to utilize that technology as well.
What is the standard startup cost for a business that does touch the plant? And the standards are never equal.
Manufacturing is probably the lowest barrier to entry, depending on what product. It can also be the highest. What you're seeing, if you're not trying to get into the extraction side of the business, which in California right now, use that as an example, there are a lot of large-scale oil producers going in to where they're taking the extraction out of the hands of smaller companies and turning it into a commodity. As that's occurring, the barrier to entry in the manufacturing side is going down pretty rapidly. That being said, if you're manufacturing a beverage on a large scale, it's going to be an expensive task. You're looking at a lot of equipment, expensive equipment. If you're doing high production cookies, I mean, it really comes down to mass scale. When you're looking at 10 million people, I think the manufacturing side, it's going to be a cost. Vape pens are probably the easiest barrier to entry because you're just filling oil, you're not needed, it's not large machinery. So any of the
license you're going to get, how big your facility is going to be, and it's state dependent, right? You can get a license to have a delivery company that's going to be much cheaper, and you're kind of touching the plant there. But because you don't have a storefront and you just need a warehouse, you still have to have certain specs that come up with the space. It might be cheaper than getting up a dispensary up and running. So it's very dependent on your size, the type of store you're going to be able to have, and the size of your business.
So like up and running average.
So up and running average to get 10,000 square feet of lights up and running and producing, you're probably looking at $750,000.
I would say 700. And also you're going to want a little runway as well.
Yeah, so I would budget $1 million.
I would budget $1 million.
So we had a question come in through Facebook about the federal lawmakers and their impact here in the state. So we are pushing for state legislation. We're asking for New Jersey state laws to be changed to legalize possession of cannabis and legalize the commercialization and sale of cannabis. While we have federal lawmakers who are supportive, for example, like Senator Cory Booker, who has introduced legislation at the federal level, they don't directly impact the state law that we are pushing for.
Why do they decriminalize?
What's that?
Why do they get it decriminalized in New Jersey? New York is a ticket now.
So decriminalization presents an interesting question. So there are lots of people who ask the question, wait, legalization, we're not ready for that yet, let's just decriminalize. And the problems that we see with decriminalization is that it doesn't achieve the racial justice and social justice goals that we push for. Why? Because if we look to New York, which decriminalized possession in the 70s, they're still making 100,000 arrests for marijuana possession because they left a lot of loopholes, and because, yes, even though you're removing criminal penalties, if you're caught with marijuana in New York, it's more like a parking ticket, you get fined, but if you can't pay those fines, you can still be arrested. So we're still seeing arrests under decriminalization models as well. And under decriminalization, you don't create jobs that can go back to, that can provide economic opportunities to communities. You don't generate revenue that can be used to fund community programming. And these are things that we think are a priority for New Jersey. And so we believe that legalization is the only way that you can actually regulate and develop safe products, impose testing, restrict requirements, packaging and labeling requirements, and mitigate access to children. You can't do any of that under decriminalization model because you're still imposing penalties for marijuana possession. We have a question about advertising. What are the advertising restrictions out west, if any?
There are quite a number of advertising restrictions. You can't advertise like on Facebook. Sometimes they'll let you get away with it for a little while and then they'll cut you down. Google also has some restrictions on it as well. So you kind of have to do a little bit like old school. I mean, you can still utilize Instagram, I believe, a little, depending on sort of what kind of business you are. Twitter, I can let you do whatever you want on there. So that's a free-for-all. But you got to be a little old school about it. I mean, you got to talk about local venues that you can advertise with, creative sort of partnership alliances. I know one thing that we thought about doing at Stemless, which we're trying to knock out, is that when you order some product off our website, get a coupon to a local delivery pizza company to go along with that. So you have to kind of be really creative about how you want to do it, and whether it be at festivals, certain events, bars, hotels, because you do get a lot of tourists that are coming out there, airports, and things of that nature, because you won't have the whole full social media suite available to you.
Yeah, so every state's pretty much different. Nevada, you can use billboards. Colorado, you can't use billboards. Nevada, you can't use magazines. Colorado, you can use magazines. So long as you prove that the magazine's intended audience, 70% of them are over 21 years old, which I'm still not sure how they prove that every time. Colorado, you can do radio. Nevada, you can't do radio. California's still trying to figure all of it out right now. So it's a mess. I don't know, it's the social media side of it. You build up an Instagram to 20, 30,000 that gets shut off one night randomly, no idea why. So there's still a lot to get figured out on the advertising front. I know what we tried to do from the start was just tie it to music. So I think there's a natural fit between cannabis and music. It's always existed. That was our strategy from day one, still is. So we advertise a lot at concerts. Most of the venues are easy. They're over 21 years old, so you don't have to worry about kids. It's the same crowd going in to buy the weed. So that was our strategy.
So we're down to our last small handful of questions. We have questions about the possible costs of licenses. Even though the legislation here in New Jersey is not yet, is still to be decided on this front, what are some of what's the range of the licensing costs in other legalized states?
Colorado's pretty cheap. And then you can get a manufacturing license in the state for $3,000. Depending on what municipality you're in, it varies anywhere from 4 to 10,000, somewhere in there. So maybe maximum $15,000 to get a manufacturing license in the state. Retail license is about the same, and so is cultivation. So that's on the lower end. I know Oregon's pretty close to that. Washington's pretty close to that too. Cali's pretty on par. It's a little more expensive in Cali right now, but not much. Most of the western state, Arizona was a lottery system, so it did cost a little bit more. It's one of the only limited licensed states in the West, but once again, it's medical only right now. Michigan's going to be pretty affordable on the medical side.
New York is expensive. If they open up medical again anytime soon, Jersey, they're still determining, I think, fully what that price is going to be for a new set of medical licenses that they're looking to extend. They're kind of potentially say around $20,000. That could change. I don't know if that's fully set in stone.
For those of you who started a venture, what level of experience did you have to figure out the process of how to start your business and how to get that up and running?
So I took probably 2 years of just intense learning, going to classes, getting online, signing up for every newsletter, going to every conference for probably 4 years before I started the business, just because I wanted to understand how the business was migrating and what was going on and was it going to be a viable interest long term. And then joining networking groups, really, really important. Meeting a whole host of people who knew a lot more than I did. And then sat down, wrote a business plan, took that business plan and ferreted it out to a number of trusted advisors that I had met along the way to see how they thought what they thought the viability would be. And then went out to friends and family, investors, and was able to raise the funding that was needed. And what you think you need, they always say you need twice as much, and they have about 10 times more. Simply just because this is a new industry, the rules and regulations are changing constantly. And so, one of our first mistakes was coming out with a product, spending probably about $15,000 or $20,000 on packaging, only to have the new rules come out 6 months later, and that packaging we weren't able to use. And many times when that happens, companies want to, they'll put stickers on it, and but now it doesn't look professional. And so we really had no way to utilize something that we had spent that kind of money on. And that just comes with experience and just really understanding how this process works. So all told, it took me probably about 3 years of just sitting back watching and getting educated before I finally pulled the trigger.
Our next question is about credit. So we have one member of the audience who is in the credit repair industry and is looking to get involved in helping cannabis startup businesses. Is there anything that anybody who works in credit repair or anybody who is looking into getting involved in the cannabis industry should know about credit, especially given the obstacles or hiccups in financing and banking?
If you're going to be lending cash at a sizable sort of rate and create a credit business, again, getting the licenses that would be around it could be difficult. You could potentially lose your license to issue that debt if you are lending to a bunch of cannabis businesses. So you just have to really watch your sort of state rules to ensure that you're in compliance with that, if that's a specific business that you're sort of looking to get into.
I think it's going to become more and more important, obviously, as the banks open up. But right now, it's a lot of shark money. And they're going to loan at high interest rates, whether you got good credit or bad, and they're going to tie up as many assets as they can. So it's, I think it's moving towards that, towards the traditional sense, but it's still not there for the most part.
We have a question about traffic accidents in Colorado. And so we hear a lot of people pointing to the number of traffic accidents involving people who have tested positive for THC. Eric and Wyatt, do you want to comment on how that data should be viewed?
Data, I mean, it is true. The accident rate in Colorado has increased over the last 6 years, but the population of Colorado has also increased 20% over the last 6 years, and our infrastructure has not increased 20% over the last 6 years. So it's a misleading statistic in a lot of regards. Since legalization's occurred, we have seen a massive increase in population. The roads are busier, there's more traffic. Naturally, it led to more accidents. The other thing, a lot of municipalities did not test for cannabis in accidents prior to legalization. So statistically speaking, you're going to get more people failing drug tests when you're testing more people than you ever tested before. But I think the biggest thing to point to, and what we're pointing out to a lot of people that have used that against us or try to use it against the movement, which they did in Arizona successfully in the last election cycle, is that we've had a population increase in Colorado of almost 1 million people in about 6 or 7 years. So that's going to lead to more accidents.
And also just testing positive for THC does not indicate impairment. And so I think that is something that we have to keep in context as well. The THC stays in your body for several weeks. And so just because somebody tests positive for THC at the scene of an accident doesn't mean that they themselves were impaired, nor does it imply that they caused the accident as well. So those are all things that we have to keep in mind as we're evaluating that information. So we have just two more questions, and then we will we'll break it. But some of the panelists will, time permitting, will be around to chat more afterwards. So, what about paid experience? Are there any paid experiences that people can be seeking out right now that might help them when we enter a legalized market, or when we build a legalized market?
Education?
Just job opportunities or ways that people can build on the skills that they're going to need when we build a legal cannabis market here in New Jersey.
I mean, I think the easiest, once again, go back to the trades. It's the first thing that's needed. All these new businesses start up, they're all going to need contractors of every type. So that's probably the easiest way to get prepared. Start studying the Denver rules around extraction laboratories. It's pretty easy to find. My guess is that those rules have been, since they crafted them in Denver in 2012, they've been adopted by every building department across the country. So that's probably the first, that's where I'd start.
Yeah, I'm going to say study up in general. You have an idea of what you would like to do, whether that be horticulture, trade, real estate license if you just want to sell, rent out leases, or warehouse facilities or dispensaries. Just decide what area you want to be in and then study up on that. And then it's also good just to get education on cannabis in general. What's a sativa? What's this? What's that? Different strains, just so that you can sound more educated when you're speaking about it.
And our last question is, do you worry about a large company manipulating the industry?
So whether it's pharma, big pharma, tobacco, or alcohol. So, take your pick. You most recently had one of the large alcohol companies invest in cannabis in Canada in a very big way. You're going to see the same thing happen with the other two. It's just how they go about maneuvering. You have some of the tobacco companies that are now in hemp. It's a natural progression for them from planting tobacco to plant hemp in many states that have lost a lot of revenue as a result of the lessening of tobacco farming. So there are natural reasons for them to go into the business, but there are also the all-American reasons why you go into the business. And so yes, we are cautiously optimistic that some of them will do the right thing, but we know that as people's revenues decline, as companies' revenues decline, and they have to find other ways to make up those shortfalls, that certainly cannabis is at the forefront of their strategic plans. It's just how it gets handled.
I mean, yeah, this is a $1 billion industry. I mean, big business is going to come in and try to, swing their big bat around. I mean, I don't think there's any way to get around it. You can do it with certain legislation, whether it be, not having any vertical licenses fully out there, entry to get a new license. So, the market is free and open, and you can build yourself upon your brand and your product. That will win out, but, when federal legalization occurs, and you're going to see big firms come in and make a lot of money and buy up businesses, and there are going to be a lot of small business owners that are going to go like this, you're going to give me $50 million for this? You're going to go, please write the check. And they're going to do that a couple of times around, and all of a sudden they're going to own 30% of the market share, right? I mean, it's just capitalism there.
Why build it and buy it?
And I think we need to really pay attention to what happens during transition periods between medical and full legalization. I mean, what we see in Massachusetts is a gifting program, very similar to what's happening in Washington, D.C., where medical has not moved into that space during the rulemaking period. Essentially, gifting means that you have people on Craigslist selling plastic bags for $150 or T-shirts for $150. That's essentially what's happening. But what I think is being proposed in New Jersey is that medical will just occupy that space, and I mean that's troubling for me. That's a huge market share that once the industry is regulated and folks are able to participate, we've already got these folks who've been operating and who are hungry because they've been suffering with the medical program for so long.
So thank you so much. I want to give a huge, huge thank you to our panelists who to give their time and coming out at their own expense so that this can be a free session for members of the community to come out and learn about how to prepare and how they can get involved in this industry that is emerging. So thank you, and thank you to all of you for sticking it out and coming and joining us on a Wednesday night when I'm sure there are lots of other things that you all have on your plate. I want to leave you with these last encouraging words that even though we've been given a wealth of information and a wealth of ideas and very inspiring ideas on how we can each get involved and how we can each build an industry for us, for ourselves, and get involved in creating something that can be very impactful for our garden state. Kristen listed a number of businesses that don't even touch the plant that can really do amazing things for ourselves and for our communities. So I encourage each and every one of you to think outside of the box. If you're thinking of getting in this industry, think about what you are already doing that you're already good at. As Wai said, anything that you're doing now, you can apply it to the cannabis industry. And where the opportunities are not limited to just growing and selling cannabis. So if you haven't already, please be sure to pick up a Take Action flyer that's outside of the doors and really help us take action. Help us shape what the cannabis industry in New Jersey will look like, because we can't do it without you. And we want to make sure that you are included and that your voice is heard so that we can build an industry that works for all of New Jersey's communities. So thank you to all of you.